Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Strategies to Teach Self-Advocacy and Self-Determination, presented by Dr. Diana Martin. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Dr. Diana Martin, and I'll be talking to you a little bit today to share some ideas that I hope you find will be useful. I served for years as a classroom teacher, and now what I do is I teach teachers that are working on their master's or PhD degree. One of the things I found about teaching is that it's a two-way learning experience, that I always learn more from my students than I'm able to teach them. I'm going to tell you about one of my students who works with youngsters, with individuals with disabilities. And she was talking about two of her students who are autistic savants. So they are people with ASD, but yet on the ASD spectrum, but yet have extraordinary talents. And she was talking about those talents as her students' superpowers. And I began thinking about maybe there's ways we could empower our students, sometimes even ourselves, by the way, to help them be able to transfer what we're teaching better to the next stages in life. So what we're going to talk about today, what I'd like to share with you today, are a couple of ideas. One, the relationship between self-esteem, how good we feel about ourselves, and how much we're able to speak for ourselves and determine our future. Pretty important goals. Of course, we'll talk about ways we can do that for our students, help them develop self-advocacy and self-determination. What skills do they need? And then lastly, help them figure out, students, how they might be using those skills, the newly acquired skills, to reach goals that they set for themselves. Now, throughout today, these are the steps that will be covered. And these are self-awareness, knowing who we are, choice making, which sounds easier than it might be. There are skills involved in deciding what to do, at least deciding what your options are, then choosing one of those options, then problem solving, where do we go, goal setting, responsibility, it's my idea to do this and this is what I want to do, and self-advocacy, speaking up for oneself. My background is in psychology, so I dip into that. I promise not to spend too much time on it. But this theory comes out of motivation theory. How do we get people to do things? How do we help our students, our children, the children of the future generations to want to get up and move, to want to make differences, to want to make changes? And self-determination theory, which is the basis of today's talk, grows from theories such as reinforcement theory. Attribution theory has to do with, as you probably know, what caused do we take responsibility for the actions we've taken, or do we blame it on the environment or someone else? And self-actualization theory, which most of us studied in school and remember Maslow and the pyramid. Three of the themes that are most important to helping students be able to self-advocate and determine their future are listed on this little circle. It has to do with mastery of goals, self-fulfillment, and intrinsic motivation. In other words, once anyone, not just your students, knows what they want, they're motivated to achieve it, and that becomes a kind of continuing self-fulfillment. There is a synergy here that if you're directed, or if your students are directed toward goals they have set that are meaningful, they then become motivated to begin to continue to follow the pathway to those goals. And this is some more theory, and I promise to get out of it fast. Self-determination theory, which is the place these three circles. Meet involves autonomy, being able to make decisions on oneself. This is interesting. Relatedness. Are we or are our students able to relate to others? And competence. Do we feel as though we are able to do it? So for self-determination theory, what we are thinking about is how to make ourselves or our students feel that they're able to make decisions, which is on the left, they're competent. Relatedness, are they supported in those decisions? And we'll talk about how to do that. And anonymity, are they able to do it without help? And then the research backs this, and I'm not going to go too far into the research. The first cluster of words up there has to do with students with learning disabilities, but the bottom has to do with all of us and all of our students. So students, in research, it has been shown that there is a correlation between students who have skills in self-advocacy, self-esteem, and self-determination. These are other words for what we just talked about. They're able to speak up for themselves, they feel good about themselves, and they believe what they do will make a difference in determining their future. And that last one, self-determination, is also called self-efficacy. If you try to do something, how much do you believe in your ability to do it? Another study shows that self-determination for students in elementary school through college not only enhances their learning, but it also improves what happens once they leave the school environment. Talk about transferability. The skills that you help students acquire in terms of self-advocacy and self-determination transfer to the environment that they will live in long after they're in school. To do these things, there are only 3 steps. We're going to talk about the 3 steps, but there are really only 3 things. You help your students develop self-awareness, you build efficacy and self-esteem, and you build autonomy, speech impediment, and reinforce mastery. So the first one, as you may know, is help students figure out who they are. It sounds like a big goal, but sometimes it's as simple as helping the student identify what they're good at, how creative they are, or how hard they try. Very simple things that develop a cluster of identifiers that the student can say to himself or herself, this is who I am. Efficacy, you help the student understand that if they try something, they can accomplish that. And that may mean starting with little tiny steps. That makes them feel good. They have self-esteem. And the last thing is they don't need you to continue on. They are individuals who have mastered skills beyond the classroom setting. And that last one is growing up. That's a big step for most of us, not just our students. As an aside, I once taught courses for reentry adults that were coming out of huge life transitions, like people coming out of prison, people coming out of a difficult divorce, people emerging from life-stressing surgeries. And these 3 steps are what we taught these adults very effectively to help them move ahead in their lives. So to start, again with that self-awareness, you help students become aware of their gifts, their superpowers, their challenges, what they're not so good at, and what they need to succeed. Help learners become aware of who they are, what might get in their way, and what they need to be better. Not be better people, but to get where they want to go. The second one help learners practice how to ask for help in a positive way. Especially with youngsters, this sounds so obvious, and yet it is so powerful. Sometimes we just have to use the language, teach them what to say. And a fun way to do this, some of the resources at the end of this PowerPoint I'll give to you, is to either role play or make jokes, to take things that are scary to them in terms of what they need to ask for, and just let them practice a lot. Let them pretend like there's someone else and do it. And then the third one was in one of my sources I did for the research for this, and I thought it was interesting. For individuals who have had to battle most of their lives just to get to the place that some of us already are, the goal may be more important to them than the method. And sometimes what we have to teach is what all of us who are successful as adults already know, is to remember to go back and that you're talking to a person. And that the best way to advocate for oneself is to elevate and recognize the individual that you're asking for help. This, I can't see the top of it. This is a continuation of the steps. So the first thing you do is you help students build skills, and you build their self-esteem. How do you do this? Well, you catch them doing something right and say, and remind them that they did something right. And sometimes it can be a really tiny, small thing. This is just basic reinforcement theory. If you ever studied Skinner, it's reinforcement of positive actions, or it can be shaping, where you start with the teeny little steps and then develop it into the kinds of self-esteem they need for productive lives. To be self-advocates, for our students to be self-advocates, they have to feel good about themselves. I'm worth asking for something. Now, I was talking about this with a colleague before I did the presentation, and I thought it might be fun for you to see. There's a little book by Peter Reynolds. It's a children's book, and it's called The Dot. I don't know who publishes it, but it's available every place. And it's a story about a child that speaks to what we're talking about today. I forgot the child's name, but the little girl in the story, who you see pictured there on the left, has an art assignment. And the art assignment is to draw a picture of something she likes. And in the storybook, she kind of has her head down on the desk, sideways, looking very concerned, or maybe sleeping, I don't know. And she's not happy about this assignment. And her teacher says, "What's wrong?" And she says, "I hate to draw. I don't know how to draw. I'm not good at drawing, and I'm not going to do it." And so the teacher, as you can see in the top of this, smiles and says, "Just make a mark. You don't have to draw a picture. You don't have to do anything with colors, or you don't have to draw a horse or a person. Just make a dot." And in the story, excuse me, in the story, the little girl makes a dot. And the teacher takes that dot, which is a magnificent dot. According to the teacher, it's one of the best dots she's ever seen. And she takes the picture and pastes it up on the wall and puts the dot and then the author of the dot, the artist, I guess. Well, this motivates the student, and she begins making dots all over the place, and pictures of dots, and different colored dots. And you see some of the illustrations on the right of this story. And in the end, of course, because it's a child's book and it has a happy ending, the child considers herself and her friends a great artist. But it just began with encouraging her to make a choice and make a dot. So how do we teach this? How in the heck can we get children with their head on the desk and doesn't want to do it, doesn't know how to do it, and doesn't like doing it, to make choices. Well, here are some of the steps. First, you model choice making. And when you model it, take that voice in your head and give it audible power. Say what you're doing. I'm looking at two choices here. I can take an umbrella with me outside, or I can leave it here. Let me look out the window and see if I might need the umbrella. It is that simple and that difficult. All it's taking the time to talk about choices that you as an adult and as an educator would make normally, and verbalizing them so that you're giving iterations, you're giving steps that the student can understand in making a choice. And then, like the teacher did in the story of the dot, you give them a simple choice. You just draw a dot, just make a mark. And you limit those. Don't give them so many choices it becomes overwhelming. And if the student or learner comes up with an option that you did not think of, make sure that there is a way that that can be offered as an option. Now, we talked about choices. The step before this is knowing what our choices are. Not a bad thing for us to do in life, by the way. But once you figure out what the choices are, and what your students do, we have to make decisions. And that means looking at the choices. So to teach this, we talk about critical thinking a lot, especially in college where I teach. And I never like that term because it always sounds like you're being critical. You're doing something wrong. It doesn't sound friendly. But it does mean not taking things for what they are, thinking about it. So the way we teach youngsters or ourselves decision making, have you ever had trouble making a choice? Probably. I have, I know. First of all, you teach what it means to make a decision. It's more than considering the choices, it's taking action. And then you move to, here are some of the kinds of decisions people make every day. And you can direct this to the student. Did the youngster decide what to wear today? Did the youngster decide whether they wanted chocolate milk or plain milk for breakfast, whatever it was? Then give them opportunities for decisions. And when you do, these are the steps. These are steps that you know automatically. And so the purpose of what we're talking about today is to take the things all of us do without thinking about it and to help use it to teach those steps to individuals who may need to learn the steps because no one's ever stopped and taken the baby steps for them, told them to make a mark. So the teacher or the advocate for the student talks about the consequences of various outcomes. We all think about this, but it doesn't mean that everyone thinks about them. Reflect, have them think about what those consequences would mean for them. Ask why those consequences might be consequences. You're not asking why they're making the decision. You're talking about the reflection and the consequences. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. That is what allows students become self-advocates. If they're not so paralyzed by the fact that they may do something wrong, they'll venture out and make a mark on the paper. And then share your own examples, but be careful. If you share too many examples that are too grown up, it might intimidate the student. The next step, these are the steps that I suggested in the slide where I covered what the things are to do for self-advocacy and self-determination. The next step is to encourage problem solving. So we've talked about choices, we've talked about decision making. Now, how are they going to figure out what their choices are or how they're going to use their decisions to solve problems? So you talk about the steps. which most of us would do. Identify the problem, gather information. You know that. You know the drill. But this is one we don't always do. What would you do if? What would you do if this happened? Which is kind of a practice. Again, model, model, model. If you studied Bandura, you know about observational learning and its effectiveness. So you are being the one that is the model for how to solve problems. You help them choose the best solution. I like the last one. I found this at one best practices site. Use movies, TV, books. It'd be better if you know what they're reading, of course, as models themselves for decision making and problem solving. Now, you've defined the options, choices. You've talked about making a decision. You've talked about what to do if the decision goes well. What are the steps in decision making? What about the final steps, goal setting and planning? This is actually part of the self-awareness to do. Start with short-term goals and develop steps. So they don't have to need to know what they want to be when they grow up. They might decide that they want to read a particular book, a children's book, for example, or they want whatever it is their goal is. There's a great TV commercial, although I'm kind of idealistic and what we used to call corny. It's for, I think it's for coffee. And it's about a little boy and his dad, and he wants a catcher's mitt, I think, or a baseball mitt. And there's a coffee can, and they put baseball mitt on it. And it shows him putting quarters in it and saving up enough money for the catcher's mitt. That's the goal. It's not a short-term goal, but it's shorter than deciding he wants to be a professional baseball player. And the steps are putting the quarters in the coffee can. That is a great lesson. That commercial can be inspiration for goal setting and planning. Probably you could do better, but for me, it was a good example. You go back to self-awareness clarification. What does the student know about himself or herself? What am I good at? What do I want? What are my challenges? And then other things suggested by the literature, you can create a list, visual maps, talk about the importance of tasks and goals, and there's my coffee can exercise. You can steal from the commercial and set up some kind of goal that's short term, and you could put little slips of paper in every time you have completed a step or a quarter's worth of money towards that goal. One of the last of the steps is, this has to do with not just self-efficacy, but self-determination, and it had an attribution theory. Explain what it means to be, you're talking to your students. Explain what it means to be responsible. You don't tell them this, but you link responsibility to self-efficacy. Remember, self-efficacy is the degree to which an individual, you, me, our students, believes that we are capable of doing something. And self-efficacy is relevant. So I might be very self-efficacious about explaining psychology, but not self-efficacy about being a professional football player. So you try to hone in on those skills that the student has, their awareness, and those things that the student is good at doing. And give them classroom jobs to do that. And talk about examples and applications, meaning, you did a good job on that. That's an example of how you're good at organizing things. This is something I found online. It's not the only thing. It's just a little exercise, but it helps the students identify what kinds of things they have responsibilities for. Sometimes it's just a matter, just a matter of identifying of identifying what the student is able to do. They're already doing it. I make choices. I do my chores if they still have chores. And if they don't, you can give them classroom responsibilities. And then in the middle, you have the statement of efficacy, what I am. I am responsible, you might say in the middle. So for self-determination, to empower students, here are the steps. And all of these steps have been built by what we have just been talking about. Teach students how to express wants, needs, and feelings. This is part of the self-awareness. And it is difficult, especially for young students, or sometimes it's difficult for students, individuals with disabilities. How you actually script them, you actually can help them develop the language. Even saying things as simple as, I feel sad today, or I feel happy today, or I need help with this. Those activities are ones that you can do a couple of ways in the class. You can work with the students one-on-one, but you can also use media. You can use, in our culture, in most cultures globally, stories are a great way to teach. The use of stories and metaphors, although we don't tell the students they're metaphors, are the way most of us learn anyway. We don't usually learn through reinforcement and punishment. That's a good way to start. But for long-lasting learning, the learning theory tells us, we learn through vicarious experience or through observation. And we get into people like Bandura with observational learning, but also into Vygotsky, who talks about social learning. So you can begin teaching how to express things by not asking them to express things, express feelings, express wants, express needs, but by using stories, plays, movies. They can be popular movies. They don't have to be something you've come up with on PBS. And you stop it. You stop the action, so to speak. You stop reading the story, or you stop the video and say, what do you think this person needs here? How do you think this individual will want to express what they want? How will they want to express what they want? How will the person say what they want? Observational learning, vicarious experience, all those help teach the student how to express their wants. And if you ever do advanced counseling, this is a lot of what we do with grown-ups, is being able to express what we need, what we feel, and what we want. So it's not limited to children. Secondly, how to ask for help if help is needed. How to ask for help if help is needed. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate asking for help. It is a character flaw. I was brought up with stiff upper lip, keep your chin up, keep your head up. Don't, just tough through it. Asking for help is something our culture does not necessarily encourage. And yet it's exactly what we need. We are not here alone. And we need to tell those we help, those we serve, those we teach, that it's not only okay to need help, it's okay to express the fact that we need help. And go back to that politeness and positive attitude that we talked about in an earlier slide. The third bullet that sums up all of this is emphasizing the importance of self-advocacy. Now, you're not going to explain to the student what self-advocacy is and how this builds self-determination. So you translate it into their level of experience. And you talk about that if you can speak up for yourself, then you will have a bigger part in determining your own future. Again, another way to do this is through role playing and stories. There are even songs, very popular songs right now, about the importance of believing in yourself. That's an old theme, but sometimes it goes over the heads of those we try to help. And this last step is what I've been talking about throughout the presentation today. And that is, provide the language, provide the visuals, provide the exercises that make this theory that you and I are talking about today, that makes sense, hopefully, makes sense to us because we're more experienced. Give it pictures, give it legs, give it reality, give it something that the youngster can explain given their own experience. You then, as we do in all teaching, make sure that they understand how it fits them. Help them to understand how what they're talking about fits them. And then you give them ways they can try it out, that they can be Superman or Wonder Woman for a day. Now, this, and their website, it might be hard to read at the top, but this is about how to establish a learning community that builds advocacy and self-esteem. And it comes from the nextgenerationlearning.org website. But a community a learning community or an educational community to encourage, nurture, and encourage self-advocacy has 4 areas that it develops. It helps learners develop habits of success. They do things on a regular basis that they can be successful in doing. It involves creative know-how by the educators. I like the bottom one, wayfinding abilities. It grows wayfinding abilities, finding a way to meet challenges, finding the language, finding the expertise, finding the skills, finding the friends, finding the support that you need, that the students need to continue in their journey on their goal, to set their goals. And content knowledge. Content knowledge for youngsters can mean knowing what the steps are in decision making, or knowing the steps on how to do something. Excuse me. This is more from the Next Generation Learning site. These are the steps, these are the resources that have been demonstrated to enhance self-advocacy and independence and autonomy and goal setting. Students are surrounded by caring friends and adults. That's back at that slide where we said that we need other people. So caring friends and adults. They also are supported by peers, near peers, and role models. And one of the role models is us, or the role models are us, I guess would be grammatically correct. We have to walk the walk. We have to not only demonstrate self-advocacy, but also advocate for our students so they can hear us saying ways to advocate for themselves. a learning community or a social community that encourages self-advocacy and self-determination includes mentors and coaches. So the steps we discussed throughout this PowerPoint, what steps can you use to mentor and develop the skills that we've been talking about? And a few attaboys or attagirls are always good too. Coaching involves motivation, and eventually you hope they get to intrinsic motivation, but external motivation is a good place to start. Networks and weak ties means that there are other sources of information and support, but they're not so binding that the student cannot be an individual. What kinds of networks are we talking about? Reaching out to families, reaching out to community groups, reaching out to the next level educators if they're transitioning, for example, from lower level courses to high school courses, or if they're graduating from special programs into community programs. All of those networks, but not having the student be dependent on those networks. And then resources, offering resources that allow the students to explore things like self-efficacy, what am I good at, to identify strengths, maybe even to build strengths, and connectors, ways that the strengths are interconnected and individual strengths are interconnected. Now, some of you, I don't know how we could have gotten around it, have probably paid attention to the media, where there's a new movie coming out about Mr. Rogers, who I always like to refer to, often in my teaching anyway. And since we're talking about superheroes, well, first sorry. So before we get to that one, the 3 steps, again, that we began with at the beginning, which is a good place to start, is developing self-awareness, building efficacy and self-esteem, building autonomy, and reinforcing mastery. Try this on yourself, by the way. You have a big life change to go through. Begin to think about who you are. That would be the first step, self-awareness, what you're good at, what your challenges are, that sort of thing. Then begin to think of efficacy and how you can become more efficacious, by the way, by mastering your skills. What am I good at? Self-esteem, what am I good at and how much do I like myself? I should like myself because I'm good at those things. And that helps you become independent, and it reinforces the skills you're good at. It helps you engage your superpowers. And more importantly, or as important, it helps you engage your student superpowers. So here we're back to Mr. Rogers, which is what I jumped to a little too early. This is another quote from that famous educator, Mr. Rogers. When I was very young, most of my childhood heroes wore capes, flew through the air, or picked up buildings with one arm, which shows he didn't know that Superman could actually, you don't need an oar there, because he could pick up buildings and fly through the air and wear a cape. They were spectacular and got a lot of attention. They had superpowers, my words, not theirs. But as I grew, my heroes changed. So that now I can honestly say that anyone who does anything to help a child is a hero to me. And I don't know if Tom Hanks is going to say this in the new movie or not, but I will say to you, if you can encourage your learners to become self-advocates, then you are engaging their superpowers and you are the hero. And wait, it's not over. Here are some websites. When I started doing research to update my skills, there were so many websites I had to give up. But, and this doesn't include a whole bunch of websites about a subject I did not cover, which is bullying, which also covers self-advocacy. But there are whole bunches of people in different states. You have a couple of states there. Almost every state in the nation has this. Becoming Empowered, Speaking for Ourselves, the We Care organization. All of these are just a few of the kinds of websites if you just do a good search.